DC Multiverse!
So even though the Batman's bodysuit has changed multiple times since his creation by Bob Kane and Bill Finger in 1939, in general, its appearance will always be some sort of variant involving black or blue with gray, and an oval bat or a solid bat with a utility belt consisting of capsules and or pouches. Long ears, short ears, black cape, blue cape. The changes are generally not too outlandish. There have been a few really strange bat suits over the years, which thankfully haven't stuck, but during the Rebirth era of DC Comics, they decided to change Batman's suit into something entirely recognizable as a Batman suit, but also very different in comparison to pretty much everything he's had. Enter McFarlane Toys' interpretation of a Rebirth-era Batman in 7-inch action figure form in their DC Multiverse line, and this is what we get. That is not bad. That's actually better than not bad. Now this Batman comes with a grapple launcher and a really giant spatulate batarang. Seriously, look at this thing. It's huge. And also a trading card with, I would say action figure photography, but I think this is actually a piece of digital art. I think that it is the digital representation of this figure. I don't think it's an actual figure. Of course, the trading card on the back has a little bio. You could pause to read if you'd like to. The figure's design is pretty much a perfect match for the Rebirth era Batman. All of the designs and the lines on the suit are where they're supposed to be. Some may argue that the proportions could be a little bit better, with the chest seeming perhaps a little bit small in comparison to the legs. Really, the head and chest fit together along with the waist, the midriff area. Some people may argue that the legs are a little bit too big. I can propose a solution to this later on in the video, but as is, I think this is a beautiful Batman figure. And the head sculpt looks fantastic. This is the very best Batman head sculpt that McFarlane has produced to date, in my opinion. And yes, if you're wondering, can this head sculpt be used to customize 6-inch scale figures? Well, here's your answer. Absolutely. You can use this on a 6-inch scale Batman as well, and it will look just as good. Now, before we get into doing any comparisons, let's take a little peekaroo at him in hand up close. Most of the paint applications on his belt look pretty clean. There are a few places where it's a bit sloppy. The back of his belt here looks pretty clean though. These gauntlets, they really have a Rebirth look to them with the angled scallops the way they are. And the engraved lines on Batman's suit, entirely comic accurate. For those of you looking for more comic accuracy, you have the bat-shaped knee pads right there. And for those of you looking to do some kind of custom cape work with this guy, well, it won't actually be that hard because this part of his cape is actually a separate piece that attaches around his back. So the head and the neck piece, they're also separate as well. But it is nice that you have that ball joint in the head and not this whole one-piece dealio like they did with the first take on a Rebirth era Batman. This is technically a comic-specific version of the character. As we all know, that's from Dark Knight's Metal. But with this Batman, even though it looks like the head has articulation, it doesn't. It's actually down here in the neck. That's where all the articulation is. So it is nice to see Todd abandoning that kind of thing with this Batman figure. Now, as for comparisons, we've got him in between the Mattel version of a Rebirth Batman. Well, kind of. He's been customized. Actually, both of them have. And then next, how about the DC Icons and the DC Essentials Rebirth era Batman? Where things begin to get a little bit weird is when you begin to stand him next to other Rebirth era McFarlane figures. So this Superman here he's just way too ginormous to ever really pose alongside this Batman figure. Same thing with the Rebirth versions of Barry Allen and Hal Jordan. Yes, again, that's another head swap, but the original stock head is around the same size as this. And just look at both of their heads in comparison to Batman's, and look at both of their upper torsos. Try to stand Dick and Babs with old Brucey here, and you run into some real scale issues. Barbara's at least half a head too tall here, and pretty much the same thing with Dick. Not to mention, again, when you look at the size of their heads, I mean, you have some serious scale issues going on. If any shot proves, without a doubt, that this Batman is just not properly scaled, Well, this picture here, Damian and Daddy, it says it all. Although you could maybe write off the idea that Damian's head is really big and bulbous and cartoony, and maybe if you put a smaller head on the Damian Robin body, it would work out. He doesn't look too bad when you compare him to an Action Comics 1000 Superman, but even then, he just seems too small. However, you can totally mix and match if you use the DC Direct Damian, the DC Essentials Batgirl and Nightwing, along with the DC Multiverse Red Robin. Now, I will say something that I feel helps with this whole scale issue is that if you got an extra DC Essentials Rebirth era black and gray version of Batman knocking around, and you swap the heads onto this body, now you actually get a true 7-inch scale head on this body, and it definitely helps. In my opinion, he certainly looks a lot better when standing next to an Action Comics 1000 Superman with this head sculpt, and possibly a few others. And honestly, if seeing this DC Universe Classic Scale Batman figure with this head sculpt popped onto the shoulders is not enough to convince you that this really is actually a 6-inch scale head sculpt, then, well, I don't know what is. Okay, and now let's just do a quick articulation test. The head is on a ball joint with a full range of roundabout motion. As is the torso, it gets full circular motion. You will need to be a little bit careful with how you pose him back and forth. I mean, he can lean forward, which is nice. It's nice that this Batman has the ability to, look at the ground just a little bit. And he would have a great range of motion backwards. I mean, you can see there's an ugly hole there. You don't want to see that. So I suppose really you're looking at about that backwards. Really? Is that it? When you use the waist and the torso, you get about that. Anything more than that, and you're starting to see the seam. But it doesn't really matter because his cape does actually get in the way of him leaning back because it comes down and it clicks onto his boots. I suppose that's going to be reason number one for a lot of you folks out there to give this guy a cloth goods cape. In the arms, well, they're attached as always by the rounded hinge in there. You can see there's that piece inside the socket there as usual. And of course there is a bicep swivel, so we know that that is going to do a full 360 round. Those double jointed elbows, what do they do? Wow, those are good. Why am I always so impressed by double hinges? They're just double hinges. I mean, they're going to do what double hinges do. Although, they don't always now, do they? I suppose that's all we need for double jointed elbows, though. There is also articulation by way of that rounded hinge in the wrist. It's kind of one of those things where it could be a little bit more articulated, but it's not. Probably largely because the gauntlet actually covers a lot of it up. And I would rather have this situation than, say, this situation. Down here, you got that typical McFarlane hinged groin with the clickety-clicks in place so that he'll hold his pose. You've also got, there's some actual motion like that. Not a lot, not as much as I'd like, but there are nice, tight, double-jointed knees. So Batman can get into all kinds of cool karate kicking positions. And then finally, as always, there are rounded hinges right down here in the ankles that are also a pivot and also have toe articulation. So now the question that is worth answering is, what do I think about this Batman figure? Is it recommendable to you as Batman fans, or is it just another near miss? Well, right now you might be thinking to yourself, didn't Brad just spend a fairly lengthy portion of the video just picking apart the scale of this figure and basically saying how much the scale stank? Well, yes and no. I don't think that the scale sucks. I just wish either all the figures were in this sort of scale or none of them were. Like, I really want to be able to stand my Bat family together. And I feel like this Batman figure looks great. I'm okay with the size of the legs in comparison to the body. But that said, like I said near the beginning of the video, this is one of my favorite McFarlane Toys Batman figures. Even if you were just going to buy this Batman figure and do what I'm going to do, which is pose it along other 6-inch scale figures, because I feel like they're going to look better together, this is still definitely worth the pickup. And I will still, in spite of the things that I find to be nitpicks about this guy, I will still give it an 8.5 out of 10. But you know what? That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for tuning in and watching. As always, it really does mean a lot to me, and I will see you with the next one. Have a DC day, everybody, and take care. Okay, bye-bye now.